house that horrid cats had been in his bed, and he vowed that he would never pass another night under a roof where such things were possible. Mrs. Tabby White was very glad, because no lady can wish for the visits of a person who throws boots at her. But the mistress of the house said sadly, "Oh, Tabby, you've lost us a fortune." And Tabby, for all her cleverness, didn't understand what the mistress meant, but went on purring proudly and wondering what clever things she could do next. And I don't know what it meant either, so don't you interrupt with silly questions. "I think we ought to wear shoes," was the next thing Mrs. Tabby White said, but all the human shoes were too big for her. However, there was a nice pair of pink shoes, quite new, belonging to the human child's big doll, and Mrs. Tabby White put them on her eldest kitten's little brownie feet. "Now, Brindle," said she, "he was named after the gentleman who told me the story. You are grander than any kitten ever was before." And at first Brindle felt pleased, then he tried to feel pleased, then he knew he wasn't pleased at all. Then the shoes began to hurt him horribly, so he meowed sadly, and Mrs. Tabby White boxed his ears softly, as mother cats do, you know how I mean. But when she was asleep, he took off the pink shoes and bit them to pieces. And nurse slapped him for it. Poor Mrs. Tabby White was very miserable when she saw her son being slapped, for it is one thing to box your son's ears, softly, as mother cats do, you know how I mean, and quite another to see another person do it, heavily, as is the way with nursemaids. But the last and greatest effort Mrs. Tabby White made to imitate human manners was one Saturday night. She saw the human child have its bath before the nursery fire, with hot water, pink soap, dry towels, and much fussing, and she said to herself, "Why should I waste hours every day in washing my children with my little white paws and my little pink tongue, when this human child can be made clean in 10 minutes with this big bath? If I had more time, I could learn to be cleverer, and I should end up by being the most wonderful cat in all the world." So she sat and watched and waited. When the human child was in bed asleep, nurse went down to her supper, leaving the bath to be cleared away later, for it was a hot supper of baked onions and toasted cheese, and if you don't go to that supper directly it is ready, you may as well not go at all, for it won't be worth eating. At least so I've heard the kitchen maid say. Mrs. Tabby White waited till she heard the last of nurse's steps on the stairs below, and then she put both her cat children into the tub and washed them with rose-scented soap and a turkey sponge. At first they thought it was very good fun, but presently the soap got in their eyes, and they were frightened of the sponge, and they cried, meowing piteously, to be taken out. I don't know how she could have done it. I couldn't have treated a kitten of mine like that. When she took them out, Mrs. Tabby tried to dry them with a soft towel, but somehow cat skin is not so easy to dry as child skin, and the little cats began to shiver and moan. "Oh, mother, we were so nice and warm, and now we're so cold. Why is it? What have we done? Were we naughty?" "Drat the cats," said nurse when she came up from the supper and found Mrs. Tabby White trying to warm her kittens against her own comfortable fur, "if they haven't tumbled in the bath." Nurse dried the poor, dear, cruelly used kittens a little. Her hands were bigger than Mrs. Tabby's, so she could do it better, and put them in a basket with flannel, and next day Tabby Kit was quite well, though rather ragged looking, but Brindle had taken a chill, and for days he hung between life and death. Poor Mrs. Tabby was like a wild cat with anxiety, and when at last Brindle was well again, or nearly, for he always had a slight cough after that, Mrs. Tabby White said to her children, "My darlings, I was wrong. I was a silly old cat." "No," purred the cat children, "darling mother, you were always the best of cats." Mrs. Tabby kissed them both, for of course anyone would be pleased that her children should think of her the best of cats.